Toscano. And we are waiting for our last speaker, Ms. Ayu Kartika Dewi. With everybody's permission, I would like to ask the assistance of ASEAN Foundation to release our participants and start the live stream.
ASEAN IPR and ASEAN Foundation joint webinar on access to education. Please be informed that the webinar will commence very shortly. And as you know that the webinar is taking place on Zoom and simultaneously live stream on ASEAN IPR's official YouTube channel. If you have any questions during the webinar, please write them down in the chat box on Zoom and comment box on YouTube. Okay. Good afternoon, ambassadors, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and youth participants in ASEAN. And of course, a very good morning to colleagues in Geneva and other parts of the world. Thank you very much for participating in this joint webinar co-hosted by the International Committee of the Red Cross, ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, and the ASEAN Foundation, entitled The Value of Education as an Essential Public Service, Ensuring the Continuity and Resumption of Education in Crisis Situation. The webinar is live from Zoom and broadcasted on ASEAN IPR's official YouTube channel. It is indeed our pleasure to welcome you all. My name is Nofrian Palawan of the Icrc Jakarta, and I will be the MC for today's webinar. Excellencies and distinguished participants, to officially open the webinar, we will listen to opening remarks from ASEAN Foundation and ASEAN IPR Secretariat. For the first remark, I'd like to invite Her Excellency Dr. Yang Mi Eng, Executive Director of the ASEAN Foundation, to deliver her opening remarks. Dr. Eng, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Palawan. Dr. Helen Durham, Director of International Law and Policy, Icrc Headquarters. His Excellency Ambassador I Gusti Agong Wesaka Puja, Executive Director of ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation. Distinguished speakers and guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all and also good morning to some of you. So, right to education is the most fundamental human right. These beliefs is what fueled the governments of ASEAN when they jointly drafted the ASEAN Work Plan on Education 2016-2022 as a guiding compass for the region's key stakeholders in developing and implementing regional initiatives on education. The work plan plays a critical role in aligning each of our initiatives with the ASEAN Social Cultural Community 2025 vision and of an ASEAN community that engages and benefits the people and is inclusive, sustainable, resilient, and dynamic. In the last 1.5 years, our resolve and preparedness in providing the best possible learning avenue for young people have been tested with the arrival of COVID-19. The pandemic has created the largest disruption of education system in history, affecting nearly 1.6 billion learners in more than 190 countries and all continents. The COVID-19 pandemic has caught ASEAN off guard. The urgent needs for digital transformation in education sector was hindered by infrastructure gap, which contributed to the slow transition from in-person to online learning model approach in most ASEAN countries. Many students, especially those who reside in rural area, do not have adequate access to internet and proper equipment that allows them to attend online classes with ease. The situation are admittedly getting a little bit better now, but schools and other learning institutions slowly embedding online learning into their curriculum and students possessing better digital mindset, which allows them to learn more effectively as of lately. Yeah? So the digital mindset of our youth is what ASEAN Foundation has been trying to strengthen throughout our initiative. As an entity that understands the importance of education in shaping the future of ASEAN, we shifted our flagship initiatives such as ASEAN Data Science Explorer and cross-border internships to virtual activity, not just to continue providing the best learning platform for our youth, but also to show them that they can still do amazing things for ASEAN and continue their quest for knowledge from their comfort of their home. So the COVID-19 pandemic has shown how debilitating a health crisis can be. Other crises such as political upheaval and natural disaster can also possess the same crippling effect to our education system. If there are no concerted efforts to overcome it, the future will be more challenging. With this development of the ASEAN Work Plan on Education 2021 to 2025, which is underway, it is our duty as key stakeholders of ASEAN to ensure that the new work plan is able to provide strong foundation for the region's education system. This is also the right momentum to accelerate the public and private collaborations in providing better recovery roadmap for ASEAN's education system. It is my sincere hope that through this webinar, you will be able to exchange best practices and collaborations experiences in improving access to educations and resilience of students and teachers in this crisis time. Thank you, and may you all have a very good session today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ang, for your welcome remarks. Now it is my pleasure to invite His Excellency, Ambassador I Gusti Agung Wasaka Puja, Executive Director of the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, to deliver his opening remarks. Ambassador Puja, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pa. Good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, friends. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this webinar, a first joint collaboration of the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation with the ASEAN Foundation and the International Committee of the Red Cross. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy amidst these challenging times. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge and convey appreciation to our distinguished partners, our good friend, Dr. Yang Mi Eng, Executive Director of the ASEAN Foundation, and Mr. Alexander Faith, the Icrc's Head of Delegation for Indonesia and Timor-Leste, for their inviting the ASEAN IPR to collaborate and contribute to this very important discourse. I also thank Dr. Helen Durham, the Director of International Law and Policy, Icrc Geneva office, for her time to deliver her keynote today. Allow me to also thank members of the ASEAN IPR Governing Councils, Advisory Board, as well as the ASEAN Movement for Peace Registry for the support and for the taking time to attend this webinar to discuss the value of education in the context of crisis situations. I believe today's event is an essential step to further strengthen our commitment to education as a crucial pillar of public service and our willingness to preserve and ensure it even in the midst of crisis, especially within our regions. We are certainly very encouraged that today's participants registered for this webinar, more than 350 people. The ASEAN IPR was established as an ASEAN institutions for research activities on peace, conflict management, and conflict resolutions. Our mandate and responsibility to promote culture of peace, and specifically the endeavor and maintenance of positive peace, has encouraged us to collaborate in convening today's webinar. Excellencies, dear colleagues, I would like to revert to the ASEAN Policy Security Community Blueprint Action Line A.3.2.I, where ASEAN and ASEAN member states are to, I quote, promote education as an effective means of instilling respect for life and the values of tolerance and moderations, nonviolence, and mutual understanding to prevent the spread of violent extremism and addressing its root causes. We at the ASEAN IPR firmly believe that peace cannot be separated from education and vice versa. Lessons learned on various peace processes, whether with the region or beyond, have shown that access to education could be a significant and powerful drive and foundation for sustainable peace in the mid and post-crisis situation. It acts as one of the main vehicles that allows upward socioeconomic mobility, the building blocks for national and local peace building efforts. Violent conflict is certainly one of the greatest development challenges facing the international community, in particular on education. Children and education systems are often on the front line of violent conflict. Armed conflict has been robbing millions of children of their education by exposing them to widespread sexual violence, targeted attacks on schools, and other abuses, including child soldiers recruitment. According to Peace Research Institute Oslo, in 2019, almost 2/3 of the world's children were living in a conflict-ridden country, and approximately around 426 million children, over 1 in 6, were living less than 50 kilometers from where the actual fighting took place. This creates what is called as hidden crisis in education. Indeed, the challenges posed by armed conflict have changed. Recently, COVID-19 pandemic has severely affected access to education. Certainly, we cannot build peaceful communities overnight. In this regard, I would like to express my appreciation to all of our resource persons for taking the time to share with us your experience and expertise. Your valuable contribution to this discussion will surely benefit the Institute in developing its research and capacity building functions for peace building, and on a wider scale, benefit the peoples of ASEAN. Your contributions also, we hope, will exploit more windows of opportunity for peace. Last and certainly not least, I would like to convey my utmost appreciation to all participants of this webinar. We hope you will gain new knowledge from the discussions. We also hope that you use this opportunity to raise questions, share your ideas and thoughts, and enrich the conversations on the issue. We need to unlock the full potentials of education to act as a force for peace. Let us work together to contribute in creating a better world in which every child can live in freedom from fear. Education is a movement from darkness to light. Thank you for your attention. Stay safe and have a productive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Puja, for your opening remarks. Excellencies, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished and youth participants. We will now listen to a keynote speech from Dr. Helen Durham, the Director of International Law and Policy of the Icrc headquarters in Geneva. Dr. Durham, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, Salamat Pagi from Geneva. It's a different time frame here. I'm so happy to join us today. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is such a pleasure to be with you virtually. Of course, we all would prefer to be together, but I think this is a very, very important initiative and we make the best of these tools we have. Before I speak, I would like to start by warmly thanking Her Excellency Dr. Ang and His Excellency Ambassador Puja for their opening remarks and also for co-hosting the event today with Icrc. This is a really promising collaboration and is important on this topic, as of many topics that we work together. Now, our three organizations share a commitment to the well-being of people, their communities, and societies. Each in our own way, we work towards ensuring that people can live their lives in an environment that is cohesive and conducive to prosperity, and that they are protected from conflict, violence, and other crises. Now, as has been noted by the other eminent speakers, today I'm speaking to you clearly at a moment of global crisis. As we all note, the COVID pandemic has affected us all as individuals, as societies, and as members of a global community. However, the impact on children and youth is indeed immense. The COVID-19 pandemic is not just a global health and socio-economic crisis. Let's be honest, it is also a massive education crisis. So the pandemic has showed us the fragility of education services, with schools closures, which impact has been noted on millions of children around the world. Now, we know that the longer schools are closed and that children lack access to education, the greater the risk that education gaps become wider and irreversible, especially for those most vulnerable in our societies. Now, this is true in any crisis, whether it's a pandemic, a disaster, or a war. And today, as we know, 1 in 3 of the world's school-aged children live in countries affected by conflict and disaster. So I think we all are very aware of the pressing humanitarian problem. But what we want to do today is work out what we can do to impact it and make it a better place for children and education. Now, there's 3 things I want to highlight in my speech. The first is we need to prioritize. The second is that we need to prepare. And the third is that the issue of protection is critical as well. So prioritize, prepare, and protect is what I'll spend the next few minutes on. But I think it's really important before we go further and I unpack these issues to share two real life situations to set the scene. We always must come back to putting people in the center of our discussions and reminding ourselves of the reality of which we face. So the first example I want to raise with you is in relation to Ukraine, and it's about the disruption of education. And the second one is in South Sudan, and it's about the lack of education opportunities. And in the Icrc, we have the privilege of working closely with communities across the world. So when the war erupted in Ukraine in 2014, many communities suddenly found themselves living next to front lines, which were hundreds of kilometers long, and thus being exposed to fighting. Now, many schools had to be closed for some time, and children tried to follow classes from home. But the intensity of the fighting, even when it subsided, life in these new frontline communities, as we call them, needed to regain some sort of normality in as safe as possible way. And going back to school was very important part of that. So in the words of a mother of a pupil there, and if you don't mind, I will quote, the most dangerous place is the road to school. We do worry about our children, but we have nowhere to go and the whole family is here. School is the only thing which keeps us going. And I think this quote very much reminds us of this bigger issue that is often forgotten, that it's not just about education for the children, but schools play a foundational role in holding communities together. So our Icrc teams on the ground there worked very closely with the school communities and the educational authorities, as well as the armed actors on all sides of the conflict, to improve the safety and security of the school so that children could go back safely. So as we all know, this example was really a clear case that for these families, education was not able to just remain on hold indefinitely when a crisis hits. So I just wanted to explain that as we reflect on what we need to do. The second quick example is an entirely different situation from across the world, as I mentioned, in South Sudan. So over the last years, our teams have been working with communities in South Sudan to set up makeshift classes for their children in remote areas, particularly borders with Ethiopia. Now, the teacher body was made up of a few adults, not necessarily teachers, but adults who themselves had received education as child refugees in other countries decades earlier. So it was a community of self-organized educational activities. And many hundreds of children's names were really meticulously registered in notebooks according to the different levels of knowledge. There was a schedule of class rotation put in place to make the use of the few blackboards, which they somehow managed to find. So a way to get around the lack of resources. But those were very poor conditions for learning, as you would know. And during the rainy season, everything had to be interrupted. So the Icrc supported them by rehabilitating the school and facilitating basic management training for the parents and the teachers. Now, both these communities were forgotten, far away from everything, but they were resourceful, they were dedicated, and with a small amount of help, were able to improve the learning conditions of their children. And I like to hold the image of these children in my mind as we look at the bigger policy issues we need to shift. So I noted that the first thing we wanted to raise was the need to prioritize education as an essential public service, including during a crisis. Now, as we all know, education is particularly fragile to the shocks of conflict, disaster, and other crises. And it requires continual effort and skills, and an education capacity takes years to build and can be very quickly and easily lost. So we also know that education is severely and chronically underfunded during emergencies when compared to other essential infrastructure or needs such as, say, health, water, and sanitation. Yet access to education and safe schools is critically important before, after, and during a crisis. It creates a protective and stabilizing effect on the lives of children, their families, and the community. Schools are often the epicenter of community life, and they are important conduits not only for learning, but critical information in relation to health, nutrition, hygiene, disaster preparedness, as well as risks relating to unexploded ordnance, child recruitment, sexual violence. A whole range of critical issues can be held as educational issues around a school. So in that sense, ensuring the continuity of education and a safe learning environment during a crisis is key to avoiding generation-wide education gaps with long-term consequences for people and countries. Indeed, it only takes a few years to lose an entire generation, and children who miss out on the critical years of primary school, evidence indicates, are less likely to ever begin or complete their education or complete it as older. Long and repeated periods without access to education during the formative years of adolescence also increases the likelihood that those children may never go back to school. And this is particularly the case with girls. Incredible issues around gender, which we see if they don't get access to education. So let's be honest, education is not a luxury of peaceful and stable times. It is a critical investment for the well-being and development of entire societies. It needs to be maintained throughout the whole period of a crisis, because disruption of education, even in a temporary manner, can have severe repercussions on the lives of many. So that is why we really wanted to put on the table the issue of prioritization. So second, in our experience, we know that we can prepare better to ensure that the continuity of education during a crisis occurs, no matter what this crisis may be. So let's spend a moment on the issue of preparation. Now, enormous strides have been made in strengthening the resilience of the education sector in the face of natural disasters. And I think there's no doubt that the Asia-Pacific region has been a trailblazer in this regard. Not since, we've got the Sendai Conference on disaster risk reduction in 2015, but certainly from my experience, it is a really important region for looking to the excellent work being done in relation to preparation. And I know our colleagues in the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement play a really critical role in disaster risk reduction, including in the education sector. And I wanted to pay tribute to our colleagues in that regard. They're deeply involved in the implementation of the comprehensive school safety framework and in the Global Alliance for Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience in the educational sector. So there's a lot of excellent work being done in that area. Now, increasingly, we are seeing an evolution towards almost an all hazards, so a more holistic approach in the preparedness and risk reduction efforts. So what this means is taking a comprehensive view of hazards. So whether they be natural or man-made disasters, notably due to climate change, epidemics and pandemics, but also hazards and risks caused by violence and conflict. This is a very welcome and very promising approach in the view of the Icrc to bring these challenges together. Now, in many areas affected by armed conflicts and violence, education continues amid generalized insecurity. And it's really important that practitioners and policymakers understand the daily consequences of protracted and persuasive or very long-term insecurity on education, and take steps to manage and mitigate these consequences as a matter of policy, not only in the temporary crisis response. So the Icrc can help with this. First, through the dialogue we have with parties to the conflict around the world, which is based on our mandate under international humanitarian law, we're able to engage and find solutions out of sometimes very complex problems. One of the best ways to reduce the risks for children living in conflict zones is to ensure that parties comply with their obligations and protect civilians and civilian objects from attack, including students, teachers, and schools. There's a range of legal normative frameworks which provide protections. And our experience shows that in a number of cases, dialogue can work and it can make a difference. For instance, we have seen that armed actors have agreed to leave school premises that they were occupying or move military positions away from the vicinity of schools. So we need to continue to have a dialogue and to raise the legal obligations that are there under international humanitarian law. Now, secondly, we can help at the school level by strengthening the safety and the security of school buildings and developing risk management and safe behaviour protocols so that school children, teachers and parents can stay as safe as possible in these insecure environments. Now, we do this in active frontline areas like that I mentioned previously in Ukraine, but also in places affected by what we would call chronic urban violence. So for Brazil, for example, we work with educational authorities to develop risk management protocols to reduce the length of school closures in a context where sadly shootings regularly occur. Now, this collaboration has brought very tangible results, and that's what we're looking for, all of us, tangible, concrete results. So despite the number of school shootings in 2018 rising over 36%, which was compared to 2016, the number of school closures dropped by 46% in the same period. So looking at the triangulation of these statistics, it indicated that you can make a difference. Now, of course, the role of ministries of education is key to ensure that there are contingency plans to make sure that education in the face of all types of hazards, including those arising from conflict and violence, are in place. And in addition, the steps can be taken at the school level, which I just mentioned, that need to be taken at a systems level, not just by the individual school, can help teachers continue to be paid despite some of the socioeconomic or political instabilities, an important point. And that school children have access to alternative forms of education delivery if schools need to be closed, and that no one is left behind. So I wanted to now move on to my third and final point, which, as I noted at the start, relates to the need to protect people and communities who are easily overlooked or marginalised and pay particular attention to the educational needs. And certainly in the Icrc, our mandate in relation to protection is high, strong, and we're very passionate about it. So as a humanitarian organisation, wherever we go, we engage with communities who often have an out of sight and are not seen by the rest of the world for a variety of reasons. Now, they may live in remote areas, in a camp or in a prison. They may be isolated because they're destitute, because they have a disability, or because they feel stigmatized or fear being abused or harmed in some ways. So these are groups we really find often struggle to have basic needs, and in particular, access to essential services. And often it's educational services. So the Icrc helps where we can. For instance, by rehabilitating schools in remote areas in places like South Sudan, by distributing school materials, by helping families address financial, legal, or administrative barriers to education, we need to find practical solutions. And for example, in places of detention, often forgotten, we sometimes work with authorities to create opportunities for vocational and skill training for detainees. Last year, together with the Myanmar Prison Department, we created a vocational training centre in the Mandalay Central Prison, which is expected to provide technical certifications to about 300 to 400 young detainees per year. This is crucial to keep their education going and to allow them to re-enter society upon release. So the Icrc's added value in this space lies in our proximity to crisis-affected populations and the range of expertise we can bring. But beyond the assistance that we provide as part of our own operations, our strongest bet, our strongest impact is to mobilize other actors and advocate for access to education on behalf of all of those who are left behind. And in fact, this is what I'm doing here with you today. We're joining forces, we're bringing our different areas of expertise because we believe education is critical. Your Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen and friends, a sincere thanks for the opportunity to address you here from all the way across in Geneva. I look forward to the conversation as it continues, and I wish us all the best in finding good solutions to this very, very critical problem that we must keep in the minds of all decision makers. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih kembali. Thank you very much, Dr. Durham, for your keynote speech. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now have an official photo session with speakers and moderator. I would like to invite all speakers and moderator to activate your camera, and we will have two photos for this session. Perhaps Stephen can help us to spotlight the speakers, please. Stephen and other organizers could help us with the photo session. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, for the first photo take, it will be taken on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Hold. Okay. Now for the second photo take, will be taken on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Please hold. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, before we start the panel discussion with our moderator and 2 distinguished speakers, we will now have a live polling. I will now hand over to Stephen from ASEAN Foundation to lead the first live polling. Hi, Stephen, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the photo op. Hello, attendees. I'd like to wish you a good afternoon. And we wanted to do a live poll to see what you, the attendees, are about. We want to know more about you, the people. So can you please spend a couple of minutes just doing the live poll? The live poll will be launched right now. Within this live poll, there are 6 questions, and all the questions are just for us to understand our attendees and our participants. So, the questions coming very fast, everyone. Thank you so much for doing the poll. The polling will end in about 30 seconds. Thank you so much for everybody that gave us a couple minutes of the time to do the poll, and we wish to share you the results for the poll. As you can see on your screen, that the majority of the participants here are between the age of 19 and 30, which we're very happy, as they are the next generation. And thank you to all the Asian member states for joining us, as the majority of you have come from within the Asian member states. And within that, the majority of the participant has come from Indonesia. And that our final question, that has your education been disrupted due to a crisis? And the majority of you have answered that the COVID-19 has disrupted your education. And today, thank you for attending, because this is the most important question that we wish for this seminar to be addressing. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen, for the live poll. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we will now commence a panel discussion moderated by Ms. Beatrice Johanna van Hove, the acting head of the Icrc Head of Education Unit in Geneva. Ms. Beatrice van Hove, the screen is yours. I think you're still on mute.
Thank you. Yes, I indeed. That is the most famous sentence in the latest time, I can imagine. So, good afternoon, Your Excellencies. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very happy to moderate this panel discussion on the value of education as a public service and on how we can ensure its continuity or resumption during crisis. I have with me two panelists. We have Ms. Josephine Lascano. She's the Executive Director of Balai Rehabilitation Center in the Philippines, and also Ms. Ayu Kartika Dewi. She is a member of the Asean Women for Peace Registry from Indonesia. And they will sharing their views and their experiences on the topic, especially from Indonesia and from the Philippines, but maybe also from other experiences I have with other ASEAN countries. So to get the conversation started, I invited both Ms. Josephine and Ms. Ayu to give a presentation of 7 minutes, after which we can dig deeper into questions related to the barriers to access and education, to the solutions that they have seen put in place, and on how the resumption of education has continued or has contributed to building more peaceful societies. After the presentations, I will then ask some follow-up questions about how we can work together and how we can better prepare for making sure that all children can have an education, and even when there is a crisis happening. I'm also inviting Your Excellencies and the co-organizers of the webinar to take the liberty at any time to contribute to the conversation. If you feel that you have something to say, please, you're really invited to contribute. And finally, I'm inviting the audience to post your questions in the chat. And we will present your questions to the panelists after the conversation and a second poll. I have to say I am really happy to have Ms. Josephine Lascano and Ms. Ayu Kartika Dewi with me. And normally we would present the speakers in a very short manner, but I have read their biographies, and I really feel that, given the topic of the seminar, it's really interesting to know from where both speakers are coming. So I will start with Miss Josephine Lascano, read her biography or present you, and then give you the floor for the 7 minutes. And then after that, I will present Miss Ayu Kartika Dewi, and then have you present your presentation. So, Ms. Josephine Nascano, you're a practicing mental health and psychosocial support professional with more than 25 years of experience working in non-government organizations and with government agencies in the field of service and advocacy for psychosocial support and rehabilitation, child development and education, peace building, and disaster risk reduction management using a right-based approach. I really feel that this experience will bring a lot to the discussion. So you're current executive director of the Balai Rehabilitation Center since January 2015, but you have been in various positions within the organizations for about 22 years. You have provided training on conflict sensitive and trauma informed practice, and you have written modules on mainstreaming children's rights in local governments and peace building. You also conducted studies and co-written psychosocial praxis in urban violence prevention and rehabilitation and the anti-torture advocacy experience in the Philippines. Apart from Balai, you're a member of the technical working group of the Interim National Preventive Mechanism of the Philippines under the Commission on Human Rights that undertakes regular preventive visits in places of deprivation of liberty. And you are also an elected council member of the National Anti-Poverty Commission, representing the basic sector of the victims of disasters and calamities. You sit as a member of the International Executive Committee of the United Against Inhumanity, a growing global movement of individuals and groups outraged by the atrocities of war and the policies that prevent people fleeing war from reaching safety. So we're really delighted to have you with us to share your long time experience and your views on education in crisis. So I would like to give you the floor, Ms. Josephine, to present in the 7 minutes, your views and your experiences. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Ms. Beatrice, and thank you for the invitation. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The Philippines sits in the Pacific Ring of Fire and experiences deadly and destructive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. It is also being visited a lot by typhoons every year that led to massive floodings. On top of that, we have armed conflicts in Mindanao, even now despite the peace accord between the government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. In spite of being a middle income country, we have poverty incidents, particularly in the Bangsamoro areas in Mindanao, where you can find the highest in the whole country. In fact, for the last 18 years, while other regions have declined in poverty, it doubled in BARM, or the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. Although there is already an established BARM government as a result of the peace process between the Philippine government and MILF, there is still probable and continuing occurrence of violence due to violent extremist groups that even recruit young people due to clan wars and land disputes. Unfortunately, local communities are still wanting access to basic services such as education, as in general, local level governance is marred with corruption and patronage politics. Apart from these, there are elements that try to maneuver and put at the side the gains of the peace process. Meanwhile, in the midst of this pandemic, where poverty in BARM is becoming more glaring, trafficking and child labor have been notable from the last several months. The number of children who stop schooling is increasing as there have been loss of economic activities in the past months during the pandemic. For those who continue in the schooling, there are no available gadgets and internet loads that can be used, not to mention that learning modules supposedly to be done at home is not easily accomplished by students, since not everyone are keen to such or keen to that such modality. Apart from it, their parents are unable to teach them, as most are unable to reach education higher than their children. Gender-based and children violence persists as girls are forced to early marriage due to poverty or clan war and became pregnant at a very young age. Currently, there is still ongoing armed conflicts that left thousands displaced, and again, stoppage of schooling for some children is only an option. Attack of schools in Barm have been regularly observed. This is because during military operations, places where the so-called rebels hide even in schools premises are present. For several years, there were reported cases of teachers died because of the attack. They are not part of the armed groups, but this might be due to clan wars or for no reason at all. Truly, it is a long way before we attain social justice, equality, and human rights. In this context, why there is still barrier in accessing education, especially in the barn area. But Filipinos in general can bounce back and survive. And I think innovating is our way of being resilient to the face of these adversities. The national level government in the past and even at the present, through the Congress, had passed several good laws related to children's welfare and development. In particular, the Children's Emergency Relief and Protection Act, or Republic Act 10821, was already legislated to ensure sustainability of actions for children in emergency situations. At the civil society and UN front, efforts are continuously being done to standardize the work for children and coordinate services and interventions for complementation and a support to the government through the cluster level agency approach initiated by international organization and attended by civil society organization at the local level. Much have been initiated by the National Education Department, but we can say that this work is much being practiced and much appreciated, I should say, in the Mindanao setting. It is also worth mentioning that the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region and Muslim Mindanao government is open in any interventions and support from the civil society as they grapple with the requirements for fiscal autonomy and technical expertise in line with the establishment of an autonomous government, while managing, of course, the people's expectations of progress in Bangsamoro. Hence, in the first few months of their installation, NGOs were supportive in helping the Barm government develop a roadmap to realize their agenda for peace and development. In particular, Palay Rehabilitation Center was actively involved in coming up with a plan for the education sector for Barm. It is not new for Balay to involve in education in emergency and peace building. We have been mainstreaming child protection that will ensure children's safety and reducing risks prior, during, and after emergencies, and ensuring continuity of learning. Rather than focus only among the education sector, we enjoin others in the community to take part in this endeavor. Although education in emergency and child protection in emergency is a global initiative, we at Balay have adapted this strategy to suit the needs of the children in the Bangsamoro, with the mental health and psychosocial support, human rights, and humanitarian frameworks alongside. We put premium in building an enabling environment for children in armed conflict and emergency situations through establishing children as zones of peace and learning institutions as zones of peace. In particular, we have worked closely with local education department and even schools on how the school environment can be supportive of this endeavor through incorporating in their learning sessions or modules peace, human rights, diversity, and healing topics, including putting the history of Mindanaoans or Bangsamoro people into its proper perspectives and making the learning conflict sensitive, culturally appropriate, and trauma-informed. We also have alternative learning system for those who could not attend formal education. We have initiated this endeavor since 2003, and we are happy that the national government have already made inroads by introducing also such themes in their curriculums and in other regions. Of course, it is not solely Balay's work, but a work of the many NGOs working around the country. We intend to help the kids to have a sense of certain normalcy in their lives through education, use education as a way of healing, realizing their rights as a child, and enabling education system to contribute in the peace that Bangsamoro wants to achieve. Alongside, we also make sure that we have community adults that are responsible in taking on the challenge of sustaining the gains of the peace through formation of self-help groups and strengthening their capacity to organize themselves, undertake livelihood activities to sustain the education and welfare of the children. We also supplement our efforts by conducting youth peace camps and human rights orientation and facilitate visioning for peace at the community level and among children and young people. We also work closely with local government units at the village level, and we enjoin their support so that they can accompany us in the work for children and peace building effort. We want to ensure that community building is in place so that that's the reason why we use the social ecology model in our engagement, not only within the education sector, but also in the community, but also in the bigger society. We want to strengthen the capacities of the village level council for the protection of children and the local disaster risk reduction management council. All our efforts are considered soft investments, but we believe that enhancing the knowledge, skills, and attitudes of the adult and accompanying them in their quest for peace and development and is, a pathway to education that is very important for the children. After all, the children is the hope and the future of the nation so that they can have a better life. As we look forward to the time that we at Palay is no longer needed in the community, we also have this work in advocacy. We believe that advocacy is important to be able to sustain the gains that we started. It's not only developing models for others to emulate or to replicate, but also to work with the national government to legislate laws that is important, in ensuring education, in ensuring the welfare of the children. Right now, we are in the forefront of advocating for the internally displaced persons protections rights bill in the National Congress, and we also intend to do the same at the Bangsamoro legislation. This we believe is more sustainable so that children of the future will stay at school and live a better life. Thank you very much again at maraming salamat. Good afternoon to everyone.
Thank you so much, Ms. Josephine, for your contribution. It was very interesting. In particular, I think that your contribution is important also because if I come back to the poll, I see that yes, there is more than a good half of the audience has experienced some form of disruption of their education, but it was only 63% was during because of COVID. And I've seen that none has lived it because of armed violence or armed conflict, which is of course really good. But it also means that you can bring that perspective into the discussion of this afternoon. So now I'm going to Ms. Ayu Kartika Dewi. Welcome to the discussion of this afternoon. I also would like to present you a bit more in detail than maybe normally, because it's important. I think that the audience knows who you are and why you are here to present your views. So today you are the managing director of the Indica Foundation, and in 2019 you were appointed to be one of the special staff to the President of Indonesia. You dedicate your life to creating social change and empowering youth. Your dedication made you leave even a well-established career in Singapore to become a primary school teacher in a remote island in Indonesia. So you know very well about education and what it means in practice. You co-founded several social movements, such as a micro grant to empower youth movements, a program that provides cross-cultural experience for youth, a platform that teaches Islamic values through critical thinking, a movement that aims to normalize failure, and a platform to promote tolerance acts in daily lives. You have represented Indonesia on a global stage. You were asked to give a speech about your work in peace and tolerance in front of Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon in London in 2017. You presented Indonesia in Future Leaders Connect, and you were selected from 11,000 applicants from 11 countries. You were also selected by the Australia Awards Indonesia to take part in the Women Leadership Program in Melbourne, and you were chosen by Tempo as one of the 13 young people who will paint the future of Indonesia in 2045. Thank you so much for having accepted the invitation to be with us today. I think that we will learn a lot from your views and experiences. So I would like to invite you to give your presentation on how you see education or the value of education and the importance to have it continued and resumed during crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. Thank you so much for having me, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm going to share my screen. And don't worry, I'm going to stick to my 7 minutes, just like Dia mentioned. All right. So I understand from the poll that majority of the audience are from Indonesia. So we all know this very well. But for those of you who are not from Indonesia, Indonesia has 17,000 islands. We have 200 million populations. And if you look at the map, the island at the bottom is actually the Java Island. That is where I live. That is where the presidents of Indonesia live. And that is where 60 to 80% of Indonesians live. Very, very dense island, right? And if you look at how big geographically Indonesia is, so we can see here Indonesia's map overlaid with the US map or the Europe map, basically the east side to the west side of Indonesia, the westernmost point of Indonesia is actually almost like the distance from New York to San Francisco. So big country, big populations, and a lot of islands, which means there's logistical and infrastructure challenges that might not be faced by another countries. Now let's look at pandemic. How is Indonesia's doing? So the cases confirmed is 3 million, but the predicted actual by epidemiologists is actually 40 million. And unfortunately, Indonesia is right now #1 in the daily deaths in the world. Very, very sad pictures. And in terms of education, so our student to teachers ratio is actually not that bad. It's 1 to 17, but it is not diversely spread across Indonesia, because as you can see before, that the population is very densely populated in Java. And in terms of our PISA rank, we are the 70th out of 78. Bottom line, big countries, big populations, lots of infrastructure challenges. COVID situation is pretty bad. Education is struggling, right? I've painted the pictures, hopefully. Now I'm gonna look at the 3 things that I've learned during the pandemic. This is through a lot of the work that I've been doing with my team. And of course, the learnings that I'm gonna share gonna be true in some ways in the different parts of the world, right? There are a lot of challenges. There are some silver linings, although they're not negating each other's, but there are some silver linings. The first one is about critical thinking. The lack of critical thinking, that's why I mentioned about PISA score earlier, the lack of critical thinking, and because all of us are at home, so we use social media a lot more often, this plus that equals to rampant hoax and misinformations. And what does it mean to peace and education and to COVID? This led to doctrination and even self-radicalizations because people are not able to filter information in their mind, right? There are anti-vax community also in Indonesia. This has been, to some extent, slowing down the vaccination process. Just a couple of months ago, there was this young lady, 25 years old. She break into the headquarters of the police in Indonesia, start shooting around, and she eventually got shot dead by the policeman because she was self-radicalized. And just a few weeks before that, there was this young couple, very young also, about 20 years old. They blew themselves up in a church in Indonesia. Again, self-radicalized. So is there any silver lining out of this? I would say yes, right? We understand that this is a wake-up call on how important critical thinking is. We cannot say anymore that, oh, critical thinking is only useful for academicians. Oh, critical thinking is only useful for people who are studying debate. No, critical thinking is important for everyone. Just like Helen mentioned earlier, education is not a privilege. Teaching critical thinking is not a privilege. It's something that has to be done for everyone. About online learning. So we're not ready for online learnings, both in terms of mindset, in terms of infrastructure. So teachers are struggling, right? Because teachers are usually teaching offline. The parents are stressed out. And this is the map of 3G and 4G availability in Indonesia. As you can guess, the majority of the connections are in Java Islands. So if you're traveling in Indonesia, you will know the differences. If you're traveling in Java, the connection is pretty good. If you travel outside of Java, then the connections start to slow down significantly. And what does it mean for our students? One student unfortunately committed suicide, overwhelmed by homework. And there are a lot of other stories, not necessarily as severe as up to committing suicide, but students get the most impact by this unreadiness, right? Is there a silver lining out of this? I would say yes, right? Because pandemic accelerate the acceptance of online learning. Previously, we have been pretty slow, not only just in school, right? Even in corporates. People have been jokingly saying that the one thing that accelerate the technology adoptions in many companies are actually COVID. So like it or not, we have been trained in this past 1.5 years to do online learning. And the third one that I'm going to say is about inequality. So definitely COVID-19 has deepened the inequality gap because not everyone has access to gadget and internet. However, I'm going to share some silver linings in Indonesia. EdTech are flourishing, right? So there are two biggest EdTech in Indonesia, Ruang Guru and Zenius. They've seen massive growth. 22 million new users that previously wasn't able or wasn't even thinking to access this education through technology, now they're doing it. Universities right now start to involve corporates to give classes online. So previously, this is something that's really, really expensive and can only be done by universities in the big cities, right? And right now, there are a lot of universities, such as this universities, Gajah Mada, start to create classes called Future Skills that inviting people from organizations like Indica Foundations, Google, Facebook, Tokopedia, and different major corporates to actually give classes online. So this is something that probably wouldn't happen if COVID wasn't here, unfortunately. Affordable and good online schools are growing, right? I'm going to give you an example. So there is Cikal School and there is Sekolahmu School. Both of them has the same founder. Both of them have the similar curriculum. Cikal previously was 100% offline, and during COVID now they're doing hybrid. Sekolahmu is 100% online class. So similar quality, right? But the prices are really different. So Chikal, look at that. The entrance fee is actually $7,000 and this is for elementary school, and the tuition is $3,000. Sekolah Mo, the tuition is much, much, much lower. That means the silver lining is that access to quality education is no longer reserved for rich students who can afford additional tutoring, who lives in major cities. So those are the three things that I've learned, and a little bit of silver lining so that we're not too gloomy and depressed facing this pandemic, because I believe that there is something that always can be learned out of this. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Ayu, for your presentation. I would like now to go back to also have Ms. Josephine on the screen so that we can have a discussion with the three of us, if that is okay. And I would like to come again back to maybe see, because sometimes have a bit of assumptions. And I wanted to verify some of the assumptions that we had with you. So, His Excellency, the Ambassador Puji said in his opening statement that peace and education cannot be separated. And I know that both of you have been talking about this. But how do you think concretely that education contributes to peace? And have you seen instances maybe where absence of education has hindered peace? But for me, just maybe to recap for you, what is so important? Why is education so important? So maybe I can start with I don't know who wants to start. Miss Josephine, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, based on our experience, education widens the understanding and exposure of young people. No? And based also in our experience, those who are in school are those who are not. Well, the more they are in school, the less they are recruited in armed groups. No, because through education, they are able to learn and unlearn a lot. No, for example, in Mindanao, the reason why there are children who are recruited, it's because they have negative perception of other culture or other religion, but in school they're able to have this discussion, open discussion about the history of Mindanao, history of the Philippines, the diversity of the people. So it's more of developing also your understanding of the context that you are in, and also developing some skills in conflict, in conflict resolution at the same time. And it's education is very helpful, to be able that to enhance what your way of life as well, because of course, when you reach a certain level of education, the better your life is, no, the better your economic situation is. And we all know that those who are lured in armed groups are those who are not able to, at least for the Mindanao experience, for those who are not able to reach a certain level of good education. So and that's why we really encourage young people to get education. No, I think that's also one of the questions here. No, you have to have education. It's not. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a higher degree, but to have a lot of learning is very important for you to widen your perspective. Widening perspective is widening the knowledge, and widening the knowledge is better understanding. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Miss
Yes.
Ayu, would you have something to add to Miss
Yes.
Josephine's remarks?
Yes, I would like to add, Ms. Josephine has brilliantly said several points that I've thought. I'm just going to add two things. The first one, I'm going to quote Tan Malaka. one of the Indonesian's famous critical and influential person in history, right? He said that, I'm going to say it in Indonesian, and then I'm going to translate it. So, tujuan pendidikan adalah mempertajam kecerdasan, memperkukuh kemauan, serta memperhalus perasaan. The objective of education is to sharpen your thinking, to strengthen your will, and to soften your feeling. And I think this is a very interesting, and I fully agree with this sentence, because I think sometimes we stop at the first part of it, that education is just about thinking. But the willingness to keep trying and the gentleness of your sense, of your feeling, of your compassion to other human beings is actually also equally important. And I believe that if anyone has these three things, they have the ability to think clearly. Therefore, they're able to filter out things that is right and not right, right? And the second one is they have a strong willingness. And the second one is they have a gentle compassion to other people who are different. They will not bomb any church, right? It will be conflicting with how they're compassionate towards other beings. So that's why education is inseparable with the peace. And the second one is school is actually a great place to make friends, right? And if you're able to make friends with different people from different countries, ethnicities, religions, you will have less um, prejudice towards them. And this is called contact theory. Once you have contact with anyone from different groups, you will have lower judgment towards them. So definitely education is really important for peace.
Thank you so much. So you say, for example, that connection is important, critical thinking is important also. But because Ms. Josephine, you are a psychosocial a therapist, maybe it might also be important to understand, are there some conditions to be able to learn, and what does it happen, when there is crisis? What kind of conditions do we need to put in place to really for education?
Actually, in crisis situation, there's this fight and flight, situation wherein it's either you want to fight the situation or you go out of that situation, and everyone experienced that. Apart from it, of course, the traumatic experience is also, very evident. But from our experience, education is a healing pathway as well. No, why is it so? We have seen that despite the bombings, despite the armed conflict that is going on, if you have this, at least an alternative education being implemented, in the locality, children will really go to that place, because it's a way of going back to normalcy. And in psychosocial, normalcy is important for the child, and education is a way of saying to themselves, no, oh, I'm getting back to normal because this is my usual activity, going back to school. At the second point, um, the education system, or should I say, the curriculums that the teachers are all providing, or teaching, is also a way of, therapeutic healing for the children. You can incorporate, discussing their experience of armed conflict in such a way that it will not be very traumatic for the child, and they will only think that they're only doing play, or they're only writing something, but in actuality they're already, in a process of healing. So it's very important that as soon as there is, a crisis situation, we have to get back to education again, in whatever form. And unfortunately, of course, during right now in the COVID-19 pandemic, where all children are, inside their homes doing their education, there is really, a staggering impact for the mental health, because they're not able to see their friends, they're not able to go to the usual things that they're going, no. And it's really very, how will I say that, hard for the children, especially the young ones, no. And as much as possible, it's really recommend that we go back to the normal, no, that they go back to school again. But of course,
Okay.
the reality is
Yeah.
not that.
Normalcy is important.
Mm-mm.
I've also heard you both say in your presentations that working together is very important. Ms. Josephine, you were talking about the UN clusters and the UN systems working together with the government also. And Ms. Ayu, I heard you talk about, I have the impression you talked about the private sector and the opportunities it also gives. So what would you say, how how important is that working together? What would be needed to be done to increase working together? That's maybe one thing. And another aspect that would be interested in is, do you know how much are children involved in that working together? And would that be also important to you? Maybe it's two questions. So maybe it's about, okay, the working together as an organization, but also working together with youth. Could that be also options and solutions to make sure that all children can go to school? Miss Ayu, can I start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so definitely collaboration and working together is something that's really important, right? The issues that we face globally right now are increasingly very, very complex. So there is probably almost there is no issues that we can solve single-handedly only by people in this field, right? We have to actually collaborate with a lot of people. And if we're looking at, so for example, in terms of pandemic right now, right? Um, every government in the world right now, or probably almost every government in the world, are 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 have their hands full with COVID handling, right? They're trying to keep people's alive, and therefore there is a limited resources that can be spent by anyone. So everyone who are in the education sector who can work together, and sometimes they are seemingly not really related to education, but they are now actually can educating, is actually an important part of the ecosystem. So I'm gonna give an example, right? So for example, in Indonesia, there is this huge network of content creators who are creating content on education. They call themselves edu creators, and so they are organizing themselves. They have trainings, they created networks, they look for opportunities, and they're educating the Indonesian societies, the children, the youths, the adults, about many aspects of life that's probably currently is missing, so, or complementing the current schooling. They can learn about COVID, they can learn about actually materials in schools, they can learn about life skills, and this network of content creators, because right now, let's face it, right? Our children, our youths, social media is their school. Like it or not, we have to start educating through social media. So we need to make sure that we are collaborating with these people as well. I guess I'm gonna stop there. I'm looking forward to hear Ms.
Okay.
Justin's.
Yeah, thank you. Of
Thank you.
course, as you have said, Miss Ayu have said that there's limited resources, and thus you have to complement your resources with the others, and also look into where are you needed most, no? So that there will be no, dual work in a certain area, so that we can maximize the resources that we have. And it's very important, the coordination thing, no, and that's one thing that we are really appreciate, no, with other organizations in the Philippines. For example, we need something, no, and which we don't have, no, services that we don't have, we can refer that to other organizations that can provide such, service to that area, no. And thus everybody will be, no, will be providing service, no. Secondly, I think coordination and this complementation is very important because of sharing of experience, no, or knowledge sharing, no. This is important because we are in in a global work wherein you want to standardize the work for children, you want to standardize the work for education and to humanitarian response for that matter, and um, sharing knowledge, no, innovation can also enhance the work of each and everyone, no, because after all, we're working not only for ourselves and for the children, but it's also an accountability for each and everyone, no, and we can develop further such accountability if there's sharing of information, no. As
Okay.
to how can children take part, well, of course, definitely it's a right to participation, no. We always ensure that children participate, no, in matters that affect their lives, no. But of course there are only limit, no, to certain extent where they have to understand, of course, the context wherein they will participate, no. And thus it's important that in every step of the way that you are doing in your project, children are also informed, no. It's an informed choice as well, and there's participation. uh, of course, when we say participate, it's meaningful to their lives, no?
Mhm. Mm. Thank you, Ms. Josephine. Maybe a last question to about preparing Ms. Durham, Dr. Durham. She also talked about the importance of preparing, and you have also been working a lot in disaster risk reduction and preparedness. But what would you see within the ASEAN context would be the most important change to happen so that we can be better prepared in terms of ensuring that the continuum of education can continue during crisis, whether it's a man-made hazard, whether it's a natural hazard, or whether it's armed conflict or armed violence.
Sorry.
Miss Josephine,
Yeah,
you can
yeah,
start.
thank you. It's important, of course, in disaster risk reduction and hazard identification is important. No, what are the usual hazards or risks that a country face? No, and as much as possible, it should be localized. No, based on the context of a certain, because disasters are not the same in around the country. No, there are disaster. For example, in Mindanao, it's more of armed conflict, but in Luzon, for example, in the Metro Manila, it's more of floodings and all. So I think, having said this, there should be a close coordination, no, planning for both the education sector and those who are working on disaster risk reduction, so that you have to really mainstream, no, this hazard mapping, disaster risk reduction, and contingency planning, no, in terms of how will education sits in or fits in, no, in this kind of planning, no. In that sense, you will, for example, no, in the Philippines, no, we are always flooded, or for example in Metro Manila, we are always flooded. If our area is always flooded and always visited by a storm, or if our area is always visited by earthquake, and we will always experience earthquakes in the Philippines, no, we have to make sure that in the plan of the education system, those who are doing disaster risk reduction are always it's always integral, no. So you have to come up with a hazard map of schools. Is the school protected, or is there a certain protection of the school in terms of flooding hazard, etc., and all? How will the school respond in case there will be a big earthquake that will come along the way? What will be the next steps of the, and even you have to have a localized plan even among the teachers and the students, no. They have to prepare. For example, if they are in school, what will they do, no? So it's important also that there is you mainstream educating them about the hazards and what can be done, no. and what will be the contingency. So it's at the
Okay.
level of the local and the national as well.
All right. Yeah. And Ms. Ayu, how do you see what would be the most important aspect to make sure that the ASEAN countries are better prepared?
Yeah. So disaster, hazard, pandemic, some of them can be prevented, some of them cannot, right? Especially like in Indonesia and Philippines, we live in the ring of fire. We see earthquakes, signals happens every other day or so. I think what is really important is not just focusing on the after effect of it. So we just think about how to handle the disaster when that happened. We actually have to prepare for it way in advance when everything is still calm and everyone can still think cool-headedly about all this. And the situations and the plans. So this is similar like in any corporations or any schools, right? We have a crisis mitigation plan or crisis communication plan. We need to make sure to see what are the different scenarios that might happen, and we need to involve everyone. So not just someone in a like or a small team creating this plan, but it has to be integrated, involving everyone that needs to be involved in the real case situations to develop this, so that everyone understands. So there is no need to do a training when the disaster happened on how to implement this.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ayu. Ms. Josephine and Ms. Ayu, I think that you have already shed some more light on the importance to prepare, to prioritize, to work together. I know that we are now going into a second poll, and then we will come back to you to make sure that you can answer some of the questions of the audience.
Okay, thank you very much, Bea, Ms. Ayu, and also Ms. Josephine. Before we go into the Q&A, we will have the second live poll, which will be led by Stephen. Stephen, the screen is yours to lead on the second live poll. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to our guest speakers. That was amazing. And hello, attendees. Hello again. Hopefully, you guys are all listening. And the second live poll is just to get your feel on all the topics that we have covered. So hopefully everybody has been listening. So everybody, the first question for the live poll is just how important is education to you? We just want to engage that education is a factor within your life. The second question is how important is, is how important is the continuity of education during a crisis? The third question is what is the most pressing challenge for youth to have a better access to education in your country/city? The fourth question is, do you think there is an inequality gap between institutions in funding towards education compared to other sectors, such as government funding, private sector, and non-government? This question might be a bit challenging, but it's just asking that, does your society prioritize education over other factors? The fifth question is, in your opinion, which of the following institutions play an important role in ensuring continued access to education in times of crisis? And the last question is, do you think that Asian countries have room to better prepare for ensuring and the continuity of education during a crisis? We'll give you about 3 minutes to answer your question. Just take your time, everybody. Thank you, Sydney, for answering it. There's 1 more minute left, everybody. Okay, thank you everybody. That's 30 minutes and I'll end the poll. So today I'll go through the questions with you and the answers. So the first question is, how important is education to everybody that is attending? And I'm so happy that education is important for everybody. As the name of the webinar, it's all about education. So thank you. The second question is, how important is the continuity of education during a crisis? And the majority of the participants here has answered that education is important or very essential. So during times of crisis, some people might not have that access to education. So it is important for us to be here and to attend these seminars and to be aware that there is pressing challenges in these times of crisis. What is the most pressing challenge for youth to have better access to education in your country? And a large number of respondents has answered that economic and financial circumstances is a limiting factor to the access to education. While coming second is access to technology, and third is infrastructure. So I think it's important that within the next seminar or next time that we discuss about the economic situation and the hardship that a lot of people face in terms of access and gaining access to education. And the fourth question is, do you think there is an inequality gap between institutions in funding towards education compared to other sectors, such as government funding, private sectors, private investment, and non-government? And an overwhelming majority has stated that, yes, the gap is significant. The fifth is, in your opinion, which of the following institutions play an important role in ensuring continued access to education in times of crisis? And the majority of 69% of participants has answered the Ministry of Education. And the last question is, do you think that Asian countries have room to better prepare for ensuring the continuity of education during a crisis? And yes, there is room to be better prepared. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Jason, for taking the lead on the second live poll. Now I'd like to give the screen or the floor again to Bea for the Q&A session. Please, Bea.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It might be I want to come back, in fact, to also the poll that something struck me quite because of maybe it's but I thought I might ask Mr. Fate, the head of the delegation of the Icrc, if he wanted to also share his views maybe on the fact that some people, the audience has said that the most challenging for access to education is not so much the safety to schools or safety to of infrastructure, but more technology. Maybe could you have a view on that, maybe of your experience that you had when you were based in other countries?
Yes, do you hear me?
We do indeed.
But I cannot switch on my camera for some reason because it says that the host has stopped it.
Okay.
So it's there you go. So you should be able to see me by now. Okay, good. Look, yes, well, thank you for having me. I'm supposed to say a few words to close the discussion, but I'm also grateful to have this opportunity to also jump into the discussion. I think what has been said was very inspiring on a number of counts. Including the reference to working together. I'll come to my experience in Yemen in a minute, but I wanted to say that upfront, working together for me is very important. And also, I think that the speakers, but also Dr. Yang Mi-Eng have highlighted the importance of technology online and so on. And this for me is very important. And that's perhaps something we have learned from the pandemics. We have a new world now. Going through this pandemic is sort of opening a world that was never there before. And we should perhaps think about this. Look, regarding my previous experience, I was before being in Indonesia, I was head of delegation in Yemen for 2 years, where you really have a very, very active armed conflict going on. And I did learn a few, quite a number of things, and that's also when the Icrc started to really go full blown into support to education. The first thing is that, and that has been said by Helen, is that it doesn't come to the mind of humanitarians immediately, giving water, giving food and so on. Yes, it comes immediately, but then education not. And it's true that, in order to live, you need food and water, and people think that in order to live, you don't need education, which is not true. If you want to live a normal life, you need education as well. But indeed, it is a relatively new sort of response, which was not something natural in conflict situation. You would go for what is seen as the very, very, very basic needs, and so this is the first thing that has struck me, how sort of oblivious we were to education to some extent for a long time. And I'm happy that this has changed, and I think this forum demonstrates that this has changed. So not immediately visible. The second thing that has struck me in conflict situation is how a little help can do a great help. Because sometimes only a little thing is missing. Sometimes if you give it electricity, then you can maybe have have access to internet where otherwise internet is cut. Or if you give one room, or if you give booklets and so on. So sometimes access to education, Helen has said, it is not funded like the rest, but sometimes you can do a lot with limited money. And I was impressed about how people would tell us, what you did here repairing the school, it's great, because something could be done. So the third point which has struck me on access to education in armed conflict is that, and here this has been said by the two speakers, we should really work together. Because beneficiaries know exactly what they need most of the time. Okay, so we should really listen, and they will tell you, if you do this, if you fix this, or if you work like that. So I think it's extremely important indeed to really listen and to combine experiences. The communities will help us to define what the little help that can really make a huge difference. And last but not least, I think this I have not seen in conflict, but I have been inspired by what the speakers have said about online and so on. I'll come back to what I was saying initially, Beatrice. I think that even in conflict situation, there is a lot to learn, and what IU, for instance, has said on some of the websites which sort of provide. Admittedly, internet is not available everywhere. Okay, so if you are in the bush in some countries in Africa or elsewhere, well, you don't have internet, so it's not a solution for everywhere. But I was in quite a few places, for instance, in Yemen, where internet was there. There was internet. So can't we sort of team up and try to come up with innovative answers that perhaps this part of the world, which is super connected, not everywhere, but it's one of the very, very highly connected part of the world. Well done, Southeast Asia, and perhaps there we can perhaps pick each other's brain to sort of see, this has been done this way. Is it applicable in such a situation? Well, maybe not, because the network is there, but it's not as strong as what you have in Jakarta or elsewhere and so on. So how can we adapt and so on? So before giving back the floor to you, Beatrice, what I would say, not as visible as the rest, And we need to change this. We need to change. It's really a basic fundamental right. It is squarely written in humanitarian law. Some of my colleagues were even surprised when I told them that it's considered a basic need according to additional protocol 2. They, I had to show them the article for them to believe it. And so, yeah, not visible, not as well funded. So we need to change, and we need to discuss about this. Small help can sometimes have a tremendous impact. And for this, we need to team up and listen to what the others are saying. Don't come with sort of a ready-made answers. Oh yeah, we've done this in Angola, so why don't we do it? No, listen to the communities and those who are involved in education, how that can be done, and then this new window on technology that your speakers, Beatrice, have really, and also Her Excellency Dr. Young have sort of highlighted. So yeah, and I think I think Helen has said that if we don't have education, we may have a lost generation. And I've been in the Icrc for 25 years, and I was mostly in conflict zones. And in places where you have protracted conflict, like Afghanistan, for instance, where you have a whole generation that has seen nothing else but conflict. If you don't have an element of education, if you have a short conflict, 6 months and so on, yeah, okay, you get over it. But if it's a long conflict, then you really have a lost generation. I think I will limit myself to this. Back to you, Beatrice.
Thank you so much. Indeed, a protracted crisis is something. Responses need to be different. I can imagine, and also from experience. But that brings me back to the Alexander, for your contribution. It brings me to the questions of the audience, and I think that the first one is even very much in line with what you have said. It might be maybe good to have also Miss Josephine and Miss Durham and Miss Aya online, so that we can maybe see who wants to answer the question. So I have a question from Nicolas Surivongsai. And it relates to COVID-19. So how do you see education access during the COVID-19 in terms of adaptability in the use of technology in different areas? Is there a program that connects education with job markets for secondary graded students in the Philippines or in Indonesia? Maybe, I don't know who would like to answer that question.
Well, in the Philippines,
Miss Josephine?
Sorry. Hello. Do you hear? Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
we do.
The students are really grappling, with this technology, and I think, having said this, it's high time, that we really have to enhance the skills, also the skill sets in terms of information technology and the use, even the basic use of apps and gadgets among the students and even among parents, because, for example, the issue right now is that the parents could not understand as well, how can they be supportive of their child, because some of the parents are not knowledgeable in terms of using the gadgets or even the apps. So I think it's really high time that we have to have a new skill sets in having this pandemic, having experienced this pandemic, and having a new, as Alexandra have said, we are now in the new world, and thus being in the new world, we have to have a new skill set, and information technology is one of this.
Thank you. Someone else would like to react?
I'll add in.
Helen? Dr. Helen?
Thank you, and thank you very much. It's been such an amazing event. I think, Josephine, what you mentioned is very important, and certainly from an Icrc humanitarian perspective, and Alexandra mentioned this, we've also got to take into account the knowledge capacity of children and families, but also the access and equity, certainly in situations particularly of armed conflict. You don't have necessarily the infrastructure available, although it is amazing whenever if we go into the field, the places where there is perhaps not other infrastructure and there is an iPhone. Having said that, I think if we are going to shift as we need to, education into a technological environment, we need to think about equitable access. We need to think about vulnerable people who are not on the grid and find and be creative about a range of other solutions for those that are just not going to be able to do. We can't have people left behind, as we said. So I just wanted to add that I think the skill set is one thing and it's critical, but ensuring that we have other opportunities, particularly in conflict zones. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
I can
Shall I
add a
go
little
to the
bit as
next
well.
question? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead,
Thank you,
Ms. Ayu.
Ria.
Yes.
Thank you. So there is a program in Indonesia that recently has been enrolled by the Ministry of Education. It's called Kampus Merdeka, or I'm looking for the right word in English. It's probably like the campus of the freedom or enabled. So it's basically, if you are Merdeka, right? I couldn't find the right English direct translation of it. Basically, you are empowered to plan your own future, and including the university students and the campus with this program. This is linked to what I mentioned earlier, that there are campuses right now that have online classes that is involving corporates. This is also actually partly to help link the education system with the job market, so that there is no too big of a gap between what the education system has been trying to prepare and what is the job market is expecting, right? And the credit is actually transferable. So it is right now a lot more applicable on what they learn in campus, so that they can really use it in the market. And hopefully this will continue in the long run, not just because of the pandemic, not just because of online classes. Thank you.
Sorry, Beatricia, can I just
yes,
add?
Yes, indeed.
For that.
Yes,
just
indeed.
want to share with everybody, since everyone here is ASEAN people, majority, we do have a new programs called ASEAN Social Enterprise, Bridges to the Future. So this project is a Bridges to the Future ASEAN Youth Employment Program. And this is a collaboration partnerships with Google. So currently we are doing some baseline study on the skill gaps. What is the future jobs and what is things that we can create to bridge the gap. Because right now, nobody actually can really tell us what is lacking, what kind of jobs is needed in the future. Of course, ASEAN Foundation focus a lot on the technology of 4.0, IR 4.0, but not everyone is fit for that kind of job. So we do research right now. Hopefully the baseline study can give us some ideas on where we can start to do the job matching and work with corporate to come forward and offer some jobs for the youth in ASEAN. So I do hope that some initiatives, if anyone have any initiatives currently, maybe it's good to harmonize it. Because I think since the resources is quite limited, if everyone is doing on their own, I mean that it will be like, the impact is not going to be so good. Yeah? It's going to be like a broken pieces, boxes. So if everybody can come together and put their effort together, and we don't offer something same or redundant, so that will be a better way to look at the future jobs market for young people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yang. I do have a question that's probably related from Shofia Almas Muria. And it's saying that during the pandemic, COVID-19, a lot of young generation, especially in developing countries, are confused about choosing to continue their higher education or help their family economic sectors. At the end, a lot of them choose the economic over the education. So what do you think about this situation? Is someone happy to respond?
Actually, I have responded. I typed my response already, but I will respond
Okay.
online. Anyway, I think that's the reality in most ASEAN countries because we are developing countries, no? and we could not afford to be, supported solely by the government. So it's reality, no. But on the other hand, I think that the government is really the key here, no, on how government will really provide assistance, no, and funding support for those who are in need. Right now in the Philippines, if I'm not mistaken, there are some subsidies going on, for for students who are unable to go back to school, no. So there are a number of students who are, access this funding, and I think the same way, no, that there should be, this funding should be increased further given the pandemic, no, rather than put, and that's our call to our government right now, rather than put a lot of funding to others, to security, put the funding of the government to education and basic services, because it's more, children will become more resilient, no, if they got good education, no. On the other hand, there are also children who, while accessing this support from the government, are also working. No, so of course this is a sad experience, but that's reality. While studying, they're also working part time. No? So I think that's what I can say for now.
May I just add some points also? There is one initiative right now. It's actually mooted from EU Shares program, the credit transfer system. Because in ASEAN, there are two credit transfer systems. One is AUN, ASEAN University Networks credit transfer system. And then another one is actually the European EU Shares credit transfer system. So these two are matured system. So there is an initiative right now, have a committee working group in co-shared by ASEAN Foundation and also ASEAN Secretariat with all the AMS representatives from the Ministry of Education, higher educations are representing each country to come out with, to try to design something quicker within these few months that students maybe can consider lifelong learning and also credit transfer for their whatever they have learned. Because we think that the TVET and also the lifelong learning things will be the next few years, at least from now. So that might be able to ease a little bit of their impact of a student who is, especially those that study in overseas. In ASEAN, students, there are many of them studying overseas and they are stranded back at home. So it is very difficult for them to actually complete their study, especially when they are in the science and technology field, because you need to do a lot of tests in the, you have to be in the school, you have to do a lot of, experiment, So that kind of cost sometimes is very challenging. Well, I mean, for social studies and all that, it's a little bit easier to transfer to virtual. But again, it is very different. The experience is very different. It's new to everyone. It's very challenging. So hopefully with this kind of credit transfer system and some, we are also trying to create one brand, ASEAN brand scholarship, something like that, to support the needy students and youth. So hopefully this initiative can be materialized as soon as possible, because I think everybody is eager to see something, that workable as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yang. Thank you, Doctor. Maybe a last question before we close the session, and I think I want to combine like two questions. It's a question from Pindo Charles Rumapea and the questions from Debbie Christine. And the question, I think that we have already touched up on it, but I do feel that access to education for all children is important. I think that we all are striving towards that. And so his question is about the disruption and the digital transformation during pandemics has caused new challenges for how to deliver justice and especially access to education in times of crisis. So in global and in ASEAN peace-building perspectives, the fairness and access to education, like the equality, women and children, disabled or the disabilities as top priorities in times of multi-crisis is a must, is what Mr. Pindo Charles Rompai are saying. And then Debbie Kristen was also asking, and what about the people who are the persons who are displaced or the persons who are refugees? And so the question is how to deliver the global justice paradigm to encourage ASEAN countries to accelerate the access to education as peace building and diversity approach. I don't know who wants to start with Ambassador Pucci? I feel that Ambassador Pucci, you have your hand up. Please don't hesitate to answer the question.
Yes, thank you so much. But I cannot operate my video. Probably the host need to activate. You cannot see my face in
No, not yet.
Okay.
Can the host do something?
Yes.
Yes, now we see you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I just try to jump in and to participate on those two particular questions. But I just would like to make a disclaimer. This is not the view of ASEAN Icrc. Indeed, this is based on my previous experience when I dealt a lot in the past with the High Commissioner of the Refugees and also with the IOM during my previous assignment in Geneva. Indeed, on these refugees issues, some of ASEAN member states are not parties to the 1951 Convention on Refugees. However, in their action, you can see that even they have been acted much more than those parties to the convention, in particular in preserving the principle of the non-refoulement. This is one side, but on the other side, we need to find out actually what actually the root causes of those refugees. Indeed, this is not about how to give them access when they arrive in one particular country, but the most is actually how to give them access where before they left the country. Some of ASEAN member states help them develop to build schools, for example. I think this is one of a good example how actually ASEAN member states do care about them before they left. I think this is to prevent them leaving the country, their own country, to be refugees. And certainly in this respect, the ASEAN member states working together with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and IOM, International Organization for Migration, and the Icrc, probably we can sit together and trying to construct or set up a module how to help them in this respect, not to in particular to give them access to educations in the country where they arrive, but in particular to prevent them from leaving their country. I think this is the most important because based on my experience in the past dealing with refugees in Atambua, after the crisis in East Timor and of course other refugees issues. This creates sometimes social frictions in the area or the region where the refugees arrive. It is not easy even to deal with. So the best thing is to prevent people to leave their country. And I think the access to education should be even maximized in those particular country. And finally, the second one is on the justice, access to education. I think this is one of the challenges in our regions, in particular during the crisis, both whether because of the armed conflict or because of the natural disaster. I think we have to work even harder to cope with this and give them equitable access. But this is actually also the responsibility of the national governments to take care of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Pucha. And I would say thank you so much also, Dr. Yang and Dr. Helen Durham, Mr. Alexander Fate, Miss Josephine and Miss Ayu for having participated in the panel discussion and responding to the questions of the public. I think that the time is now to say for giving back the floor to the MC Novrian. I give it back to you now, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bea, Ms. Josephine, and Ms. Ayu for the panel discussion. Thank you for all participants, and thanks for your question. And due to the shortage of time, we apologize in advance if not all questions can be answered during this session. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite Mr. Alexander Fate, the head of Icrc Regional Delegation to Indonesia and Timor-Leste, to deliver his closing remarks. Mr. Alexander, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Novian. Let me put the right camera on. Good. So, Excellencies, dear colleagues.
Sorry, your microphone.
My microphone. I always put my microphone up there. Okay, good. Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. So, first of all, the discussion today, I think, was a great opportunity for all of us to revisit the importance of education, and especially the importance of access to education and safe schools. My heartfelt thanks to all the speakers and the moderator for your contribution. Your experiences and views really, I think, have led this debate. I hope that all participants also found it interesting and enlightening. There is no doubt, I think, considering what we have said today, that the continuum of education and access to safe schools during and after crisis should be prioritized. Education enables people to live and rebuild their lives with dignity, and it provides them with knowledge and skills to make important decisions about their livelihood, and well-being. This requires actions before crisis. Preparedness has been mentioned by the speakers and in some of the questions, is highly important when we want to safeguard access to education. The all hazards approach in preparedness and risk reduction efforts is taking a comprehensive view of hazards, from those caused by natural and man-made disasters to pandemics, but also hazards and risk caused by violence and conflict. We should protect people and communities who are easily overlooked or marginalized, and pay special attention to their education needs. Once again, I would like to remind that the Icrc tries to ensure that our proximity to crisis-affected population and multiple areas of expertise which can all be put to good use in support of access to education. Last but not least, we see great value to team up. I have underlined it myself, to team up and strengthen the partnership with different actors in order to address the transversal challenges on access to education and sometimes make a difference. Here, I would like to convey that the ICRC stands ready to discuss and work together with you all. Education is everyone's matter, and we all need to consolidate all wisdoms and efforts, and including, of course, the beneficiaries themselves. It shouldn't be only experts discussing this, but we should also ask the people most concerned, those that we are trying to help. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we truly appreciate you all to come to join and contribute constructively to this important seminar today. We hope to continue to exchange views, learn from each other, and act complementarily. I would like to express our sincere thanks to the ASEAN Foundation and the ASEAN IPAR for your collaboration. Particularly is Her Excellency Dr. Yang Mi Eng and His Excellency Ambassador I Gusti Wesaka Puja for your leadership and also accepting us as a partner to work with. Thank you very much, Madam and Sir. As a last word, I would like to share a quote by Nelson Mandela, which has been given to me by my colleagues, the former South African presidents. Say it's not beyond our power to create a world in which all children have access to good education. It's a very simple but very powerful phrase. If we want it, we can do it. It's not impossible. It's within reach, but we need to get down on it. I do hope that each of us uses the power that he or she holds to make access to education at all times for all of them, even during crisis. I wish you all the best. Stay safe and well. Power of education will cherish the values and respect for a better world. And as we said, perhaps I would like to finish off with an optimistic sort of last word. Perhaps this difficult situation may actually bring new ideas. And that's how I would like to say what we are going through at the moment is such a huge challenge, but we may also learn from it, including for the topic that we had today. Thank you very much. Back to you, Beatrice.
Thank you very much, Alex Hunt. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for your active participation. We highly appreciate your participation and, of course, contribution to the discussion. We wish you a good day and evening. See you again. Bye-bye.